That's what I said when I needed help tying down the guy I captured in my basement. Anyway, if you couldn't guess already, this episode is all about helping each other. Specifically, twisted paladins that want to purge the good and bad energies away. Let's get into it. The Duskmire paladins are a strange bunch. While they are commonly associated with the much more friendly and far less unstable paladins, do not confuse them. The Duskmire paladins are a strange group of paladins that have given up faith and despair altogether. They have no emotions and seek to purge all of the positive and negative energies from the world. They believe that emotion is what causes people to act on impulse, and keeping it around is just going to cause more problems, much like it has done in the past. And while their goal is, somewhat admirable, the way they go about it is not very admirable. Instead of using the magic they possess to make people calm down or reassess their mental state, they prefer to beat you over the head with a hammer and neutralize your soul, forcing you into a mystical coma where you can speak to the real divine power only the Duskmire paladins have been able to speak to. Anyway, this episode is going to be a little strange because the Duskmire paladins are a sub-archetype, meaning they don't share their main mechanic with any other archetype, and they also just don't have as many units as an archetype. But just like I told my ex, even though it's smaller than the rest, don't mean it can't fit the best. Fuck you, Janet. Anyway, let's get into it. Before we dive into any units, let's dive into the mechanics that they use. First up, Blighthammer. This is an interesting thing that breaks a ton of rules and has a lot of funny interactions with a lot of other cards, but we won't be getting into that right now. Blighthammer lets a unit spend its combat phase before combat to attack an ally unit, healing for the damage that would be dealt. Second up is Judgment. This is another interesting mechanic that no other archetype has access to. When an ally on your side of the field dies from an enemy effect, something happens. Now, there's a lot of intricacies to this effect, but again, we won't be tackling them in this video, so don't judge me like my ex did. And now that we've got the super unique mechanics out of the way, let's quickly go over the common mechanics the Duskmire paladins use. And we're going to be going rapid fire here, so first up is Spell Barrier. It blocks the next instance of damage you take from spells. Second up, Void Barrier. It blocks the next effect that would affect you. Third up, Bulk. It reduces all instances of damage you take by an amount. And finally, Vitalize. The unit uses its health as its attack. And now that we've got their mechanics out of the way, let's dive into their units. And we're going to be skipping the minions because they don't have any, so let's dive straight into the mids. First up, we've got Emdra, a really tanky unit with 2 damage, Blighthammer, Vitalize, and a Judgment effect that gives him bulk 1. This guy is hard to take down on his own, but he's got some crazy utility with the Blighthammer, and he's even more tanky if you activate his Judgment effect. Lore-wise, he's got nothing. He lost his memory, and that's the bulk of his character. But it's probably better that way, because there's no telling what would happen if he remembered. Anyway, let's talk about Seraphina. She's the hardest hitting, but also the highest healing Duskmire paladin there is, and she gets even more damage with her Judgment. Lore-wise, she was the daughter of a very strict mother and queen. Her mother would frequently tell her that she needs to stop focusing on the present and look towards the future. Her mother was also brutally murdered by an Iron Chain mage. As such, she's sworn herself to purging the insanity from the minds of everyone, even if it means removing their ability to think. And finally, Garviel. He's unique because he's got 2 Judgment effects. His first Judgment effect is to give a unit Spell Barrier, and the other Judgment effect is to give a unit Effect Barrier. He's also got a solid 6 health, 0 attack, and Vitalize. Lore-wise, Gavriel used to be a paladin, a quite good one at that. He never hurt anyone, always used his Judgment for good, but sadly his mentor was a lot like Janet. They left for no reason! This caused Garviel to freak out and act impulsively, believing that they had forsaken the Paladin Code. They promptly ran away and lived in a nearby forest for a few months. He later returned to the town and found out that his mentor just had to go see his sick mother, and if Garviel just stayed calm and continued to train, he would have stayed with the Paladins and actually had a good place to live. As such, Garviel has sworn himself to purge emotions from everyone to prevent anyone from going through what he went through. And now let's dig into their bosses. Kicking it off strong, we've got Eldrick. He's wicked tough because he's got bulk 1 and 10 health, but he's even harder to take down because whenever a Judgment effect resolves, he gets a stack of Effect Barrier. On top of this, he also has Vitalize and Blighthammer, meaning he uses his health as damage, meaning he can heal someone for a staggering 10 health. And come to think of it, his attack is a lot like Janet, a 0. Anyway, lore-wise, he was born to a very sad couple. They frequently used plant-based substances and alcohol to stop themselves from falling into a deep state of sadness. This caused Eldrick to be alone for most of his life, and seeing what damage the fear of sadness can do to someone, he swore to make sure no one had to feel this fear or be affected by it. Next up, we've got Seraphina. She's a little strange because she has a mechanic that's unique to her and a very few select Duskmire paladins. Her judgment effect can only be used once, and it revives an ally that was killed by an enemy effect with their base stats. Other than that, she's got high health, low damage, blight hammer, and a cheeky stack of spell barrier when she's summoned. Lore-wise, she's probably the most stable Duskmire paladin. She was born to a father who dug graves for a living and was paid by a mafia group to bury people alive. Her mother was a necromancer that helped her father bury these people alive, as well as make sure that everyone he buried alive was eventually dead. As such, Seraphina grew up around a lot of death, sadness, and corruption. This caused her to not show any emotions because she was scarred and didn't want to be put in the ground next. As such, she wants to make sure that no one shows emotion to save them from her mother and father. Anyway, I can't think of a joke for this, so I'm just going to play the laugh track. Sadly, we won't be able to cover Theridin or Victoria in this episode because my editor will kill me, and it doesn't help that I am my editor. So instead, we're going to be wrapping it up with a stat analysis. They are super counter heavy, they aren't too aggressive, have great defense, and some solid utility. And digging into their power budget, they have a solid combo, low power, medium-high difficulty, and some wild effects. Overall, I think putting them right here is super good. And that's going to be it for this episode. Let me know if you guys want to see more of these kinds of videos, or if I should start making some lore videos. Leave a like, drop a sub, write "fuck you Janet" in the comments, and get ready for next video. Later!